me some truth.
This is the first date on a speaking tour that I'm going to be doing, presenting some new information. So in the new book I'm talking about Satanism in heavy rock and heavy metal, for example, the science of sound, cymatics and sound frequencies and that kind of thing. I'm getting into lifetime actors and culture creation and social engineering. We'll be touching on a few aspects of that. So I've had to select a few highlights for this talk tonight, and if there is a theme that kind of binds all this information together, it's all to do with the concept of placing the truth in plain sight, revelation of the method, giving us an opportunity to understand what's going on if we're able to interpret the cryptic, encoded kind of way that this information is put out. You could call this talk Music as Mind Control, because that's another all-pervading element of it. Or an alternative title could be It's Not As If We Weren't Told at every step of the way what's going on. For part one, I want to go into an anniversary, which we're on right now. 30 years since the launch of the UK's acid house scene. So that whole thing got going at the tail end of 1987, and it kicked off big time in 1988, which came to be dubbed by the media at the time the second summer of love. There's our first clue as to what might be going on here. So the first couple of chapters of my book are dealing with examining the many parallels and connections between the 1967 counterculture, the hippie scene, which grew up out of California in the 60s, and crossover elements to what got going in London 21 years later with what came to be known as acid house. Some very interesting elements to it. So the counterculture scene of the 60s was all about psychedelic rock music coming along to replace the styles of music that had gone previously, and major societal changes that were happening at the time, and all of it being fueled by the arrival of large quantities of LSD, which seemed to appear out of nowhere. But when you get into the research, and there's been much research done on that scene in recent years, you discover that a lot of the LSD would appear to have been put into the market by those nice people in Langley at the CIA, who had a vested interest working with other groups and networks in changing the culture of the time and steering it off in certain desired directions. I have a very strong connection and memory to the acid house scene of 1988 because I'm at the right age to have been right in the thick of it when that whole scene came along, and I got caught up in the wave of it all, and I was a manipulator's dream because I bit it hook, line and sinker and was absolutely led down certain paths in the same way that young people were in California back in the 60s. And I started to notice a lot of parallels between the two scenes, a lot of it in the imagery that we started to get. So this is an iconic picture from the acid house party scene as that kicked off in '88. Here's another one featuring second along there from the left, Paul Oakenfold, who's one of the key DJs that instigated that whole sound and that whole movement. And this is Danny Rampling, who founded the club Shum, which was another major acid venue in those early years. So the official version of events, because there always is an official version, there's a Wikipedia cover story for everything. And when it comes to how the acid house scene kicked off, we get the story of these four young London DJs, which was Danny Rampling, this guy right here, Paul Oakenfold, who we just saw, Nicky Holloway and Johnny Walker. And the story is that they went out to Ibiza for Oakenfold's birthday on holiday in September 1987. And they were captivated by the eclectic, diverse array of music that was being played by this Argentinian DJ called Alfredo. And they felt inspired after partying under the stars and having this kind of spiritual epiphany with the music to harness it and bring it all back to London and start their own club nights where they could unleash these sounds on people back home. Many of these iconic club nights happened just a stone's throw from where we are right now. So Nicky Holloway started a night called The Trip, there's another clue, at the Astoria Theatre. The Trip was one of those major events that got brought back from that fateful trip to Ibiza. Paul Oakenfold established a night called the Theatre of Madness, possibly another clue, at the Limelight. And Rampling's night Shum was at a fitness centre, a gym, in Southwark before it moved to various other venues. But the epicentre of this whole scene was very, very close to where we are now. So here's a flyer for Shum, and the name of this club night, Shum, is supposed to represent the feeling that the rush of adrenaline and chemicals to the brain that clubbers would experience when they were taking ecstasy, E tablets, which were the drug of choice for this particular scene. So I note with great interest that the first Summer of Love of '67 was fueled by what was known as acid, LSD. Then this scene that came along 21 years later on the opposite side of the Atlantic was known as acid house, so you have the link there with the word acid, and you have ecstasy having replaced LSD as the drug that absolutely permeated this scene and appeared to come out of nowhere in limitless quantities, with very few people that were taking this stuff and distributing it seemingly falling foul of the law. They seemed to turn a blind eye to much of this stuff being put out there. The media happened upon or settled upon the title The Second Summer of Love to describe this whole scene. Prior to this trip to Ibiza in September 1987, in the book I mention an interview which Danny Rampling did many years later, where he talks of having discovered that there was an event in August 1987 which was referred to as a harmonic convergence. And it's supposed to have represented, according to the official story, an alignment of certain planets which led to a change in consciousness that humans were tapping into at that time. And it's very interesting to me that that is alleged to have taken place in August '87, and these four young London DJs went to Ibiza in September of '87 and came back with this amazing epiphany of how they wanted to change the culture of nightlife in Britain, and set about doing that. It seems to me that at the tail end of the 1980s, as it gave way to the 1990s, there was some kind of shift in consciousness that was happening that people were able to tap into. We had many world-changing events at the very end of '89, the fall of communism, the end of the Cold War, and all these other world-changing paradigm-shifting events that were happening. So it makes me wonder whether the controllers that would have been behind all these social changes were aware in advance that there were these consciousness shifts about to come in, and rather than allow that to go off randomly and by chance, they wanted to be in control of the whole thing. They wanted to harness it, and they wanted to steer that consciousness off in certain desired directions, and creating this scene which would capture the minds and the hearts and the consciousness of young people at the time was a great way of ensuring it went off on script. It's very interesting to look at some of the flyers for some of the key clubs in Ibiza prior to this trip of 1987. We discover all manner of occult, metaphysical, mystical symbolism going on. There's one for S Parody featuring the apple and a snake there, with all kinds of connotations that brings. Here's another one with the familiar one eye being shown. Here's some black and white duality imagery, and we'll be seeing quite a lot more of this as we go on. And here's another one. You've got a pyramid, you've got the all-seeing eye, you've got black and white duality, you've got hints of Freemasonry, you've got hints of Illuminati type imagery there. And again, these are in the years leading up to this world-changing DJ's trip to Ibiza. So there are some clues here to suggest that the way might have been being paved for this legendary Ibiza visit. A couple of other interesting elements as the acid house scene progressed and got into the festival and dance music scene. In the book, I've got a section of the chapter called Enter the Toffs. And you had this one guy, Tony Colston Hayter, who was a public school boy that got in on the party promotion scene very early on. And he wasn't the only public school boy that got in on the scene as well. Ministry of Sound nightclub opened in 1991 in Elephant and Castle, South London. And the guy behind its founding was James Palumbo, who is now known as the Baron of Southwark. He's from the nobility peerage, so-called, and he seems like quite an unlikely candidate to be a nightclub boss when you look at his background. Billionaire, property investments, very much an establishment figure. So there's some questions to be asked there about whether by this stage this whole scene had already started to be hijacked and steered off by certain interested parties, again, rather than having been allowed to develop under its own steam.